Hello, and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast where we celebrate the magic of the movies, though sometimes someone just gets sawed in half. I am Marc Dottavio.
Ooh, I'm Seth Troyer.
And on today's very special Halloween episode, we are joined by film critic and horror aficionado Katie Rife for two of the most harrowing films ever made about serial killers. 1986's Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer was revolutionary in its casually realistic depiction of violence and those who commit it. We're going to discuss how its uniquely disturbing approach influenced the true crime genre to this day, as well as one of the most unpleasant of all the films that it influenced, 2019's repulsive true story about German serial killer Fritz Honka, The Golden Glove. But first, I want to welcome Katie Rife. Katie's writing has appeared in Vulture, IndieWire, RogerEbert.com, Rolling Stone, Polygon, and more. She's also the former senior editor of the AV Club and one of the main voices that once made that the best pop culture site on the web. Of course, all good things must die. But Katie, I'm glad at least you are alive and well with us today.
Yeah, still out here. I'm here.
All right. This is so crazy. I would always listen to you and Dowd talk on the AV Club podcast all the time. And here you are now right in front of me, live and interactive.
On the show before too, right?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Me and Dowd both have a penchant for really dark movies, so I'm not super surprised that he's been on this podcast as well.
Yeah, we did In the Company of Men and Naked with him.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I think you might have topped those though with these choices.
This is Men going just a little further. Just a little further.
The premise was explained to me and I said, okay, bet. Challenge accepted.
Fair to say you're in the major leagues at this point. You're winning. I'm saying uncle. I'm officially not having a good time anymore. You win. You're doing a good job. Unwatchable, Hall of Famer. These are icky.
Yeah. So would you? I mean, I always associate you with horror and genre films. Is that? I assume that was been a lifelong kind of wheelhouse for you.
Not really. I mean, I was definitely a morbid child, but
I love that.
I grew up religious, and so my parents wouldn't let me watch R-rated movies or anything like that. So I wasn't really introduced to horror until I was an adult. But I was definitely always kind of a gothy little weirdo. I had a phase where I was really obsessed with the Salem witch trials and would just read books about them and talk about them at length to anyone that would listen. So
great. Well, then I think you're the perfect guest to have on for this special Halloween episode. Although, like we were saying earlier, these are not really the funnest movies.
No.
And even putting them
in the background.
Yeah, even putting them in the horror genre is appropriate, but almost a little misleading. But I guess we can get into that. But was there's some reason that this in particular, at least Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, jumped out to you on our list when you were looking through the options?
Well, I mean, it is one of the most brutal movies I've ever seen in my life. And it's set in Chicago, and I live in Chicago. So, I kind of wanted to do a hometown favorite.
All right, perfect. And how far back do you go with this? Do you remember, the first time that you saw this movie?
I don't remember the first time I saw it, no. I rewatched it a couple years ago, and it had lost none of its power. I probably around the same time that I saw The Golden Glove, because I saw that at Fantastic Fest in 2019.
Okay, cool. And it's one of those movies that the reputation precedes it. I also was a big horror fan for, most of my life, but for some reason I never got around to Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, even though I can picture that, the VHS tape with him on the cover grimacing and the he's not Jason, he's not Freddy, he's real.
Yes.
And it maybe, which again is another kind of misleading thing about this, but they certainly marketed it well. But yeah, the history, just for anybody who doesn't know about this, is, this was a very little movie that was shot in under a month on 16 millimeter for like $100,000.
Mhm.
And even though it premiered at a film festival in 86, it wasn't until 1990, I believe, that it actually found a distributor and got a limited release, because this was not something, I guess, that people thought had a lot of commercial potential. And they tried giving it an X
Weirdos.
rating, although they eventually released it unrated. And I often hear this movie get lumped in with other films that helped inspire the NC-17 rating, like The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, that especially Roger Ebert was a big champion, not only of this movie, but of inventing some sort of an adult rating that would be more appropriate for films like this, that didn't just make them into, put them in the category of pornography.
Right.
But it was really interesting to go back and read Ebert's review, and that him and other critics were championing this
And that's
as,
surprising for
in that
Ebert.
in-between time.
Honestly, for Ebert, that is unusual, because he usually came down really hard on a lot of horror movies, particularly in the 80s. He was not a big fan of the genre, actually.
Which I do
Yeah.
think it makes sense, though. I mean, once you finally do watch this, it is a portrait. It is a biopic. It feels like it's a very much, yeah. You said it helped to inspire a lot of the true crime, like as we know it. But yeah, it is. I don't know, like in my mind, one of the first of that kind. It does not feel like it is going for scares necessarily. It does feel like it's just telling a life story, which is a bizarre thing to see in like the horror section and everything. I remember like catching this on the IFC channel or something, and just like I grew up like you. I feel like where I was just like a in a Christian family and never would touch even a rated R movie. So
Mhm.
like even at that point I still had like quite a reverence for something that would be called Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, like which I could imagine an actual horror fan encountering this and being like, oh, okay, yeah, so it's going to be another Friday the 13th, and you put it on and it's not. Like me, I was like not surprised in a way. I was just like, oh my God, this is everything I thought horror. This is what I thought Friday the 13th would be as a kid. I feel like it was that like level of just like how your brain makes it worse than it is. And this was finally like,
Mhm.
oh, this is as bad as like even worse than my brain could conceive, you know? Oh my
Yeah,
God.
there's certain things they show and certain things they don't in this movie, and I think it's very deliberate what they show and what they don't. But to back it up, the idea of the realism in it, I think that the thing about this is that it's like very loosely based on the story of Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, his sidekick, who was like a drifter serial killer. But the thing is that, like, the realism later on, Henry Lee Lucas had just made up a lot of the crimes that he confessed to, because he got like special privileges when he did that. He got to go out and, find bodies, and they gave him like fast food lunch and all this kind of stuff. So he was just telling tales. And so it's true, but it's not, because it's based on a very unreliable narrator, which is a serial killer, like a real serial killer.
Yeah, it's crazy to
Oh,
read
that's
about the real
interesting.
case, because you you can't even say for sure how many people this guy actually killed.
Right.
I've seen estimates anywhere from like 2 to 40 people, because he confessed to like 600 of them, and
Because
clearly
why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
even the ones that he was convicted for arguably might, or likely a lot of those he didn't even commit.
Right, exactly. Because, like I said, he got special privileges when he would,
Mhm.
put on a show for the investigators, who were very excited to, like, this was like the Mind Hunter era. This was the era of the profiler. And so I'm sure they were very excited to, have such a dramatic thing to work
We got a big one.
on.
Yeah. Oh,
Hmm.
that element is interesting. I didn't know about that necessarily, but it definitely ties into what I think is one of the most striking takeaways, like as far as images go, which there are like explicit scenes that are very intense, but there are, especially towards the beginning, just these instances where he'll go into a house with a woman,
Hmm.
and then we don't see what happens until this camera, like suddenly we're in the living room and the camera's slowly like panning around the couch, and we just see her like broken dead body, like strangled and everything. And we start to slowly hear like sound effects of like what would have happened, and like going on with our brains imagining like what must have happened and things like that. So that adds like an extra element of like those almost feeling like they could be like fantasies, or there's a gap in what we know about what was real and what happened and what didn't happen, what he was involved in, what he wasn't involved in. I love that.
Certainly. And that's one of the oldest tricks in the horror book. You know what I mean? Like Val Lewton back in the 40s and Alfred Hitchcock, too, both didn't showed less than they didn't show, and then you let the audience's imagination fill in the gaps. But at this one, it starts off that way, letting your imagination run wild, and then it shows you the actual reality of it. And I think that's sort of a deglamorizing the idea of like serial killers and serial murder, because like the reality of it is just disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I can understand how you can find videos of, Siskel and Ebert railing against the Friday the 13th movies as the moral decay of cinema. And but you could also understand then how they would see a movie like this where the violence is not treated in a way that's fun, not even in a typical tension release kind of way. That it's not even actually that graphic. I know there's one scene in particular we'll talk about, but it's more about just how
there's some upsetting scenes.
Yeah.
In this movie.
Absolutely.
Oh.
But as far as like gore effects or something, it's more about how casual and cruel and matter of fact it is that makes it so disturbing.
Totally. And, you have to consider that the budget was probably part of that. There's probably some ingeniousness on the director's part, John McNaughton, because he didn't have that much money. And how was he going to get maximum impact out of the minimal budget?
Yeah, and this has this kind of dangerous feel to this movie because even though it is accomplished, it has the feeling of somebody making a movie for the first time. That this was the first feature of the director John McNaughton. It was also the screen debut of Michael Rooker, who we'll talk about. That was he just like blazes off the screen. I think it's one of the best or most striking film debuts I can think of for an actor. But also the other main actors, it was more or less their debut film also. And
which adds to the feeling that it's real because they're not faces you recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously today people will recognize Michael Rooker, if a lot of people from like the Guardians of the Galaxy and other James Gunn movies. But he's been in tons of other stuff besides that. And I don't know, I want to talk a little about how he comes off in this movie as this character, because on one hand, he seems to have this kind of gentle, almost ingratiating manner about him, which I recognize in some of his other roles, while at the same time, he's obviously this terrifying, callous person. But it never really seems calculated. Like those two sides coexist. And I think that's what makes him so scary in his kind of charismatic way.
Yeah, he seems almost boyish at a certain point, like which I think is, I don't know how intended, what was intended and what was not, but I mean, even when you read about him, he was abused as a kid. You almost like there is sort of this thing about him that he's like not. You're getting the feeling that he isn't properly developed. Like this guy did come from like an intense background. It is not like I don't know. He does not come from the mold that everyone comes from, and there's something like, yeah,
and neither do the other
malformed.
characters in the film either. They come from a really rough background. And then Otis, his sidekick, kind of comes across as like maybe borderline mentally handicapped, which is like that's a thing, because that's a thing with like real serial killers. Like the idea of like a Hannibal Lecter is just not real. This is real. They're like dumb, violent people who are just very brutish. They're just instinctual creatures. I have to disagree with you though, that I do think Henry does have some intention about him, because he sees Otis, and he deliberately kind of takes Otis under his wing and teaches Otis the ways of being a serial killer. And those parts of the movie, to me, are some of the most challenging, because it comes off as like a buddy movie at times. And you're like, You know, like these two guys like going out for a beer and then casually murdering. Like a scene that struck me when I watched the movie again last night was when you know, Otis has some kind of interaction with somebody that he's frustrated about, and he goes, I could just go out and kill someone, and Henry goes, yeah, and he goes, yeah, and then they do just that, and he shows them how to kill somebody. I think that's pretty calculated. Like he sees somebody who he can bring into his world, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, because Otis is definitely more of an open book than Henry is. And
Mm-hmm.
to the extent this movie has a plot, I mean, there's a story, but, you know, no one's even aware, seemingly, that this crime spree is going on. There's no detectives or cops on their trail. The
Yeah.
biggest plot that we get is this kind of sociopath showing the ropes to another one who it clearly is amoral and just, you know, frankly dumb enough that to be capable of this, but maybe without that extra push might have never started killing people. Like he could
Oh, totally.
take it or
Yeah.
leave it, you know.
He wouldn't be
Well,
killing
they're
people if Henriette showed him how to do it. He would
Right,
not.
oh yeah. I mean, they
but he's a
both
quick
seem
study.
like people that are trying to. I don't know. It seems communicated to me that like, yes, they come from like rough backgrounds or like I don't know. They are also. It's like the element of it does seem communicated that it is about taking power back because they do seem like such like I don't know they're poor, they're just getting by, and like this is something that they can do to like exert some real power and like do something that no one else would do, you know. And I don't
Sure,
know,
but
that seems really powerful here.
a lot of people are disenfranchised though, and they don't do this. That's the
Oh
thing.
yeah, I'm not saying
You
that's what folks do. Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Right. This maybe that's built into, I don't know, the specific constellation of circumstances that created these people and exactly
Hmm.
what's happening. So that even though this is not like you don't come to this movie to get the facts of the case because that's very, very loosely, you know, based on what they just may have thought have happened at the time. But
Hmm.
it feels very credible that you could see just the banality of how something like this could end up happening, that
Yeah,
there isn't a big secret to it.
yeah, and I think you know, to kind of touch on what you guys were just saying, I do think they are products of their environment in a sense that like the city around them seems very cold, very uncaring. There's that one scene where they're filming, so these two guys just attacking another guy in the park. They're just
Hmm.
filming it from afar, and it's just happening, and nobody's doing anything, and nobody notices, and you get the impression that this kind of thing just happens all the time, and it's whatever, you know, that nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, and that's a big part of this movie is that at some point they steal this video camera from a guy that they kill, and we see multiple different things that of them filming with this camera, including probably the most infamous scene from this movie, which oh sure we can just dive right into that now. I guess that I went into this knowing by reputation this scene, so I was a little bit braced for it. But I didn't know exactly how it unfolded, which is especially the fact that we only see this after the fact on home video while the killers are watching them commit this home invasion. And that makes it all the more upsetting somehow. And thankfully it is over like relatively quickly compared to what I was expecting, but it is such a brutal and upsetting scene of them, you know, assaulting this woman while the husband is tied up on the ground, and the son comes home in the middle of it at one point. And I mean, they just murder the whole family. And the fact that they keep rewatching it on this video over and over again, I mean, that was definitely the toughest part for me to get through with this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
like, and at the end Otis is like, I want to watch it again, which is
Yeah.
just so chilling.
And
The
I was like, I
camcorder
barely watched it, Otis.
yeah, the camcorder is really interesting because on the like, I think here you can kind of see like intention and practicality coming together again, in the sense that like
Mhm.
shooting that scene on a camcorder was probably cheaper and easier than setting up a full like 35 millimeter or 16. I'm not sure what this film was shot on. Definitely
Mhm.
film, but I'm not sure which type.
I believe 16 millimeter.
16, yeah, this would be yeah, that makes sense. As opposed to setting up all the lights and everything you need to do it on film, you can do it on this camcorder, and that gives it this sense that saves money, number one, and number two, it gives it a sense of immediacy and rawness, because I think that video, you associate it with news, and so you associate it with things being real. But at the same time, it is a little bit of a distancing thing to almost make it slightly more watchable, because it is in this small little box on the screen, and it's not filling up the screen, and it's not, it distances you from it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really smart thing to do technically, because you're also avoiding, for a first time filmmaker who maybe isn't prepared to even from an editing perspective, like really make that work with like from like a thriller sort of standpoint, like all like the action going on and keeping it all straight and all that, of like a intense home invasion murder of 4 different people, like this is like it is way more effective than that would have ever been, and way more like effective as far as like what is actually feasible for these filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a common device now that assume in 86 was something you did not see nearly as much, which is the home video footage. Obviously today we have the found footage movies, but even people using just little brief snippets like that, I don't think was as common, certainly not in this context of a horror movie. And you're right, it gives it this documentary kind of feel where you could see someone believing like, wow, this might actually be what this would look like, or you could convince someone this was real even.
Yeah,
I
and
could imagine
there's something
it
with the
having even
idea of
more
the tape
impact.
too. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
I
there's
was
something
done.
about the idea of the tape too, because when I was watching it, I was thinking, I was like, when you, when you go to the thrift store, there's these stacks of like unlabeled tapes, and you don't know what's on them, and one of them
I
could
always
be
wonder about
this.
those.
Can you
Yeah, oh my
imagine,
God.
like,
Yeah, I mean, there's
finding this
always the
tape?
myth,
Yeah,
of the snuff
yeah,
film,
exactly, the myth of the snuff film, exactly.
Yeah, I'd almost be disappointed. I'm sure if you took home those tapes and then went through them and they're all, recordings of QVC or TV shows or something. I always imagine there's something more sinister and unique in there. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
totally right. And the rest of the violence in this, I guess it's weird how long we wait until you actually see someone get killed, because like you said, we just get all these after the fact shots for a while, and then once things go off in earnest, then we do have things that are not quite as disturbing as the videotaped home invasion, but still just the fact that they're flagging down somebody for help for their car, and just the guy who's unlucky enough to try and help them, they end up shooting to death.
Mm-hmm.
Is just there's nothing that I think you could really spin as titillating about the violence,
Mm-hmm.
No, it's
or
just sad. It's like
yeah,
that's
exactly.
really like what's difficult about a lot of it, is just like sad and like depressive, like in that way of like,
Yeah,
on
brutal.
top of it being like obviously they shot this guy for no reason, but like they're like, it's sad that you're seeing that this is real and it does happen. This is like based on a true story, that people are so like deranged and sad and depressive in their lives that they turn to something like this in order to get some sort of excitement, or
Mm-hmm.
like, that's what's difficult.
Yeah, and something for me that is very real, and is very brutal and uncompromising in this movie, is like the misogyny of it, their attitude towards women and
Mm.
sexuality, and that they definitely see like having sex with a woman, raping a woman, and killing a woman, all is kind of the same impulse, which is really gross and disturbing. But
Yes.
like, it's misogyny is real,
Yes.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about Becky, who is
Mm-hmm.
Otis's sister in this film, and basically the third, kind of main character, who never really becomes privy to what is going on at any point. But her brother does attack her and try to rape her, which is what ends up leading to the end of his and Henry's relationship, where, I mean, we spoil everything on this podcast. So Henry ends up killing Otis and disposing of his body.
You say end of relationship, he gouges his eye out and cuts his
Yeah,
eye
I was being a little too coy.
Oh yeah. But
Haven't we all had relationships that end that way, though?
Oh, they all do. Yeah, and Becky also reveals that she has like a history with like intense forms of abuse and misogyny, and in a certain respect, you can see a sort of normalization that's like also going on in the way that she is kind of like turning a blind eye to certain things, where she's surrounded by these like monsters.
And Otis also has some sort of interest in boys. There's someone he's selling drugs to that he tries groping, and I know the real Otis was homosexual. At least that's I think he identified that way. And there's even a suggestion that in real life, him and Henry had a relationship, like a sexual one, which, I mean, I don't know. Who knows what is true or not in everything that comes from this story.
I mean,
but it's weird how you have that aspect along with him having this incestuous rage or desire towards his sister.
I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I feel like sex isn't even the word to use. It's like it's about domination. It's about power. You know.
Yeah,
like
I want that.
Rape isn't sex. Yeah. It's power. It's a power thing.
Yeah, that definitely helps make sense of, I guess, where his character is coming from in both of them, because their first bonding moment over murder is when they're hooking up with these two ladies, which turns into an assault, which turns into a murder. And it's interesting to study Otis's reaction to that, where he's kind of like a little shocked at first, but Henry spins it in a way where he says, well, look, it was either us or them, and helps dispose of them. And that's kind of the entryway. So that's definitely a big thing that they bond over, is this dehumanization of women in particular.
Right. And the idea of, seizing power. That's why I say that, like, you know, to them, like, assaulting a woman and killing a woman is kind of the same thing. It's just about power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this movie does a really good job, I guess, of not leaning into the sensationalism that's kind of built into this kind of a story, and that horror movies, you know, historically have definitely presented in ways that were not exactly responsible or really grappling with what they were presenting. And in that way, I was thinking a lot during this movie of The Honeymoon Killers, which I'm not sure if that's one you've seen or not.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Which came out, I believe it's a 60s or 70s.
That was the
movie.
60s, I think.
The 60s,
mid to late 60s, I think. I don't know.
Okay. Here. So definitely a long time before this, but it's another like low budget kind of cult film that's a true crime story ripped from the headlines, with unknown actors and a first time director. And it has this same kind of disturbing, realistic, matter of fact treatment of the violence, while it's still has kind of one foot in that B-movie exploitation genre. And I think this does too, to an extent, at least maybe a little more than I was expecting, because we do have a lot of fade outs and music cues where we get some of those 80s synths and like gated drums, you know, going on. It almost, I don't know if I want to say in a televisual kind of way, but I mean, there were maybe it's just a product of the budget and, you know, how it was filmed, because, you know, it's in the Academy ratio, everything is grainy, and
I think some of that realism in that documentary style, I do think was intentional. It's not purely a side effect of the budget. It's supposed to seem as real as possible.
Yeah, and so it's just interesting to think that this was a debut film, and I'm looking at the rest of John McNaughton's filmography, and I mean, Wild Things is the only thing I'd really heard of that he done since then.
Do you believe he also did Wild Things?
Right?
What? Man.
Same guy just did Wild Things.
Just like cheesy, erotic thrillers. And I don't know. Do we have any idea what exactly happened with him? Like, do you think this was just the best, circumstances coming together in the right time and place, or did something go wrong? Like,
that's wild.
Man's just got range, I guess.
Serious debut, you know, like, I don't know, wild.
Dude's just got range.
I guess so.
But to go back to the music, there's something they do on the soundtrack for this that I find really, really upsetting. I'm really into upsetting sound design. It's just a thing that I like. And in this movie, on top of the music, like you were saying, they incorporate like animal sounds and human screams on the soundtrack a lot, and that is really, really upsetting. Like you hear sounds, it sounds like a big cat or like a dying rabbit, and then you hear like human screams, and they're all kind of low on the soundtrack, and you hear them a lot over those shots of the bodies that are already dead, and that helps you imagine what might have happened.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a like Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibe to that, where a lot of the music or sound design is just here, whether it's chicken cluckings in Texas Chainsaw or human voices. Or they kind of reminded me too. We just talked about Clean Shaven with Isaac Feldberg, which was another debut film that is really heavy on this disturbing sound design to evoke that, as far as different voices and animal sounds. And
a newer film, The Zone of Interest, does a lot of interesting things along these lines as well.
Okay, I don't think I've heard of that.
New Jonathan Glazer premiered at Cannes. I saw it at TIFF.
Oh, it's the new Jonathan Glazer movie. Mm-hmm. Oh, I can't wait to see that. Oh, okay.
It's fucked up. It's perfect for this podcast.
Oh man, I'm so jealous. I can't wait to see that movie.
Oh no, the sound design is one of the most wild things, and the animal stuff like that. I was like kind of scratching my head about it, and I don't know if it's a tie-in at all. But then, like when you read like the background on this guy, there's lots of like animal abuse too in his background too. Like there's just like
it's more serial killer 101.
Yeah. But like to like wild extents, like his mom torturing him by killing a mule, like that was given to him as a gift, and like making him look at it, and then like him indulging in bestiality with his half brother, who he also like. It's just like all this like intense, crazy stuff. And the sounds are like those scenes where they are like just like these still photographs almost, where you're zooming in on a woman's body and you're hearing the screams. Like that's on my unwatchable list of, I just can't handle it. I can't handle like screams very well. Like regardless of what's going on screen, it is just really, really off-putting for me.
Yeah. Since we do spoil everything on this podcast, I'll say the part of this movie that really makes me like want to go lay down on the floor for a while is what happens to Becky.
Let's talk about the ending.
Dark. Especially because there's a scene earlier on. So like when Becky first shows up in the narrative, it's implied that she's escaping from an abusive husband, I think, or boyfriend. And she left her a kid. She left her child back home. And there's a scene towards the end of the movie where you hear her having a phone conversation with her kid. And like the dialogue is very naturalistic. Like that, to me, it sounds exactly how people speak in fragments. Usually they don't say everything they mean. There's not a lot of exposition in real life dialogue. And so I really like that phone conversation, and the acting in that scene from Tracy Arnold is so good, and you really feel for her and you understand kind of what her plight is here. And she just has the misfortune of trusting Henry. And then what happens to her in that context, like having that context makes it just extra devastating what ends up happening to her.
Right, because obviously there's a tension over the whole film, since this is a killer of females, of him being so nice to her the whole time, basically. And he ends up killing Otis as a way of protecting her. At least that's how it could, looks on the surface. So when they take off at the end, I don't know, was there, again, we'd have to go back to your first time watching it, I guess, to, was there actually a question you could have entertained of, wow, do you think he really is just going to go off maybe and stay with her? And I guess that question hangs in the air a little bit. There is kind of a chilling moment where she says, I love you. And he just kind of sits there and says,
He says,
well,
I guess I love you too.
I love you too. Yeah.
Woo! Woo!
And
Yeah.
I was like, do you guess that?
I don't think he can. He's
yeah,
not capable of that kind of emotion.
For sure.
Well,
but then the way that it handles this, where, when we just see them go to bed and he leaves the hotel alone in the morning without seeing anything that happens. And then that last shot is him pulling the car over on the road and leaving a bloody suitcase out there.
Yeah, because the thing is I remember the first time I saw this movie, when he left the hotel alone, I thought maybe he was just leaving her there. Like he was just leaving her. And you don't realize until you see the blood on the suitcase that he killed her, that she's dead.
It's fucking sad. I don't know. I'm just like left. It's just sad. Oh,
yeah.
Because she seems so like wide-eyed and kind of like oblivious. Like that's part of the tension throughout the whole thing is she's surrounded by danger and she doesn't even know it really. And she also is like attracted to the most dangerous person in the room. Like she is like gravitating towards him throughout the whole movie. And you really are crossing your fingers for her, kind of like maybe she can just be. They can be Bonnie and Clyde at least, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
she could just become Mrs. Henry.
Only Clyde. It's just Clyde.
Yeah, like she can fix him.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
or they
is
can
like
just be
the
fucked
ultimate
up together, but at least be alive.
Right. Who can't relate to that, right?
Yeah, the ultimate I can fix him. Henry Ford the serial killer. Yeah. She's a really tragic character, Becky. But there is one thing for me that I find kind of fun in this movie, and that is it is so Chicago. The iconic Chicago movies are all like Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Blues Brothers, whatever. But like this, to me, is a much more recognizable Chicago than you see in any of those movies. Like there's one thing in it that is very accurate that you don't see a lot, and that is that if you listen to like Becky and Otis talk, they sound like kind of Southern. And that is there are different kinds of Midwestern regional accents, and you almost never hear the pseudo Southern Appalachian one in movies. But from the way they talk, I would guess that they're probably from like Kentucky or Tennessee and move up to Chicago for work. And that is a really sharp, real, true to life detail that you just really don't see in movies very often. And like, two, they give Henry's address at one point in the movie, and it's 1801 West North Avenue. And I had a friend who lived at 1800 West North Avenue. So I texted him and I said, "You live across the street from Henry." There's a lot of recognizable locations in this movie if you live in Chicago. A lot of them are gone, but some of them are still there, like the apartment building, and he walks past a gas station and an exterminator's storefront, and that's all still there. It's not too far from my house, actually.
If they ever put you on the Chicago Tourism Board, you can pull out this movie. This is the essence of our city.
Open offer. If anybody ever comes to Chicago for a movie thing and you want a personalized Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer tour, I will take you to all the spots.
Oh my God.
And then you'll die. But
yeah, right. I mean, saying, "Here, get into my car and we will drive around after you go to Henry places." It's like, "Ooh, I don't know, should I?"
Why do I need to bring a giant suitcase again? Don't worry.
Right? I'm throwing a giant duffel bag in the bag.
Just be human size.
And people don't often talk about Tom Towles' performance as Otis in this as well, because obviously Michael Rooker just has this charisma to him. And but watching, I think that's how is his name Towles? This guy's last name. He has been in other movies. I recognized him from the Rob Zombie movies that he would eventually.
Yes. And I think Rob Zombie cast him because of Henry, because he's probably a fan of the film.
Yeah, but when I first started watching this, it's like, this just seems like a real guy. Like, how could this even be a performance? This looks like a guy they pulled off the street.
Oh,
and I assume he has fake teeth in this. or either that or he got some really good dental work afterwards. But he was just like,
That's how they
I
pay
don't
him.
know. He's just as authentic, but without that kind of magnetism that, you know, a great actor would, like Michael Rooker, would bring to it, which is all the more impressive, maybe easier to overlook. But
Yeah. The charisma is really important for Henry because it's why Becky is attracted to him, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes him a little bit likable, which is makes the movie even more disturbing.
right.
Yeah. But Otis is very clearly more of just like a reminder of what these
Hmm.
guys are, which
Hmm.
quite often are like Otis, just dumbasses who are just cruel and bored and yeah, like
Totally.
nothing attractive about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so overall, I guess I am interested. I mean, do you think that there is anything about a movie where it's kind of like the lack of real insight or a big statement is the point here, right? That there's it's showing that these how there really isn't more to these people, and you take it all the way to the ending and closing on that shot of the suitcase, that there's a real feeling of just kind of nihilism to the whole movie. And I mean, is there anything about that you think that holds it back a little, or is that enough um, of a goal, you know, for the to see the entire movie through? I mean, whoever
No,
wants to jump on that.
No, I think that that is the point, and I think it's a trenchant point, and I think that
Mhm.
and it actually is kind of visionary because when you think about the '90s, this movie came out, it was made in '86, but when you think about the '90s, in the '90s, there were all kinds of characters on TV and in movies who were these like cunning serial killers who are super geniuses and no one can catch up with them, and it's like you already have like kind of the antidote to that or the response to that, and it's
Oh
Henry, which
yeah.
was made before all that happened.
I totally
Mhm.
agree. That is like one of the responsible things it does. Like regardless of it sort of existing just to be gross and like a black spot on your movie shelf, it is very true in that regard. At least truer than what came after it and what came before it, as far as like, yeah, this is, you want to talk about a serial killer, this is what it's like, this is what they're like. It's
Hmm.
sad and it's, there's nothing glamorous here, right? Except a slight like, I don't know, there's momentum to the movie. It is like exciting at a certain point to like you're wondering where it's all going. But yeah, it's like this evil anti-biopic thing, which I think does go a long way for me of it being like a oddity in that respect. Like especially at the time, it must have been very strange, like to encounter, because especially at the time, it was like the point of a biopic is to watch uh, about a person who I should aspire to be, right? Like I'll be at the end, I'll be like, wow, isn't Abraham Lincoln something? That was lovely. And here's the exact opposite. Like, why would someone do this? Like, yeah, it's like a very transgressive move in a way.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the way that this movie just kind of presents it, just puts it all out there almost without comment, I think goes a long way towards de-romanticizing serial killers and all kinds of um, true crime things that it's easy to get obsessed with, much more so now, I would think, than at the time. So I'll be interested to see where this conversation goes when we get to the Golden Glove and how these same ideas apply to that movie, pushed even like further to its extreme.
Yeah, it doesn't have that modern sort of like, aren't we being naughty? Like, aren't these like that rock star flair or something that it feels
Hmm.
like a lot of
No,
things
not at
have
all.
now, like
Yeah, no,
Dahmer or whatever.
exactly. Like, and that's what makes it so brilliant is that it came before all that stuff, and it just debunks all that. It debunks things that hadn't happened yet. It's very, very forward thinking.
Yeah, and that almost makes me wonder how much what was super intentional, and if there's at least some sort of quality of this being lightning in the bottle, you know, of
Mm.
all these first timers who almost didn't have the experience to know how um, just how different this truly would be. and
Oh,
to
well,
the
I
point
think
where it ricochets off. Not to take credit away from them, but just like obviously they couldn't have known about the true crime explosion that's going on now, and getting money to, I'm sure, with the assignment to churn out a horror movie and then coming out with this, for it to feel so revolutionary. It's just
well,
interesting to see how they got away with it.
Well, I have to disagree because true crime
Mhm.
has always been popular. True crime's been popular. It was very popular in the Victorian era, and this time you had a lot of true
Okay.
crime magazines, and you had a lot of true crime TV shows. Like a lot of TV news magazines were big, and this was the court TV era. This was a few years after Ted Bundy's trial was the first televised trial, and so it was just a different. It was a
Okay.
different form, but true crime was, it's always been popular. But I think this one would have taken place in the context of like court TV and Ted
Sure.
Bundy and those type of '80s figures who did get glamorized a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point because there definitely has always existed in certain forms, and uh, maybe it's just the internet that has made it seem like there's so much more out there
Yeah,
now.
there's
But
more
it's
out there
it
of
did get
everything.
yeah, but
no,
it's
it did
feeding on
get
the
so
same
much
thing
more.
that people were already always morbidly fascinated with.
Mhm.
So you're definitely right. You can look just at the Jack the Ripper stuff and how that immediately spun off into a media sensation that
Yeah.
again clouded all the facts in the same way that the Henry Lee Lucas case did.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and that's, I guess I'll just make this my final point, and then I'll give everyone a chance to give any kind of closing thoughts or anything that we haven't gone into. I certainly wouldn't unwatch this movie because I do see why it championed and how it transcends its genre in a way that makes it, again, maybe not the best Halloween movie if you're looking to have some fun, but the way that it toes that line, being something that is genuinely chilling, but in a much more insidious and insightful, by way of not being insightful, kind of movie that is fascinating. And who knows? Maybe let's not count out John McNaughton yet. Maybe he'll come out with
Wild Things
another
3.
winner at this point. Yeah, but Seth, you have any final thoughts? Then we'll let Katie have the last word.
I mean, I struggle because I struggled with the movie viewing experience itself. Like I did like just toss and turn and just look away from the screen so often. It just hit my buttons in a big old way, my particular ones. I don't know. Yeah, and it is
Seth's a
just
delicate flower.
a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
when it has to do with evoking not just like gross acts or murder or rape, there it's exuding us the real life sadness of those things is what really hits you. And I think the fact that it is a true story, or at least based on true events, even you know uh if a lot of it is misconstrued, and I like how I like how it does play with that idea, not to go on a tangent there, but like that it is sort of an unreliable narrator, which you pointed out, Katie, which he also, there's points in the movie you can point out where like he's even describing like, oh, I stabbed my mom, and she's like, oh, I thought you said you shot her, and he's like, oh yes, I guess I did, and it's like that whole thing. I kind of loved that. That's just a parentheses, but yeah, there's something about it that just makes you ruminate on the real life violence, violence towards women, like that element too, of just like men out there like still perpetuating this life of violence and this dangerous life that women in their wake have to kind of like live and try and survive and things. It's also like the the last thing I would say is like there's such a like scuzziness to this, is like the ultimate thing that would have freaked me the fuck out at a certain age, and it still is like creepy crawly as far as just the look of the film, just the film graininess, like some about 80s movies and this level of like kind of lower budget. I just feel like if you would put this on as a VHS is like the way to watch this movie too,
Hmm.
like which also plays into the meta parts with the VHS camera and
You
stuff.
might have thought it was real, like if you had,
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
on like a grainy dubbed VHS tape, you might think that this was real.
Absolutely.
People thought Blair Witch was real many years after this, so certainly I could see people even before that
Or I'm amazed there isn't like
falling
some
for
kind
it.
of myth that went around where it's like, well, okay, like it's a movie, but like when you're watching the footage, that's the footage they found. They found their
Totally,
Henry's
exactly.
camera or something.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope most people have enough media literacy to know that an edited scene is not written. That's
Well, I just
footage
mean
and you had to
like
cut it together. But
maybe in like 1986 or something, though. Yeah.
I don't know. Every day I see some new example of media illiteracy that shocks me. So who knows?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't unwatch it, but boy, I don't know. Like again, it's like very interesting to talk about and think about. And then I feel like I could get myself to like putting it back in and maybe just turning it off again because I just like boy, it was tough for me.
Mhm.
All right. Well, anything else that we didn't get to, Katie, that you wanted to say in conclusion?
No, I just think this is a really brilliant
Mm-hmm.
film. I think everything comes together in a way that is just really intelligently done. We talked a little bit about how, for example, the technique of using the camcorder and how it ties in with like, ingenuity and creative intent coming together. And then you have these performances, and these are theater actors, and Chicago's a theater town. And what I really admire about this movie is what we were talking about with the deglamorization. It's like, oh, you guys like violence? Oh, you like serial killers? Well, here, this is what it is.
So you like this, right? No, maybe
no.
not.
Oh, this isn't cute at all. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's provocative in that way, and it's transgressive in that way, and I admire that about it quite a bit. I think it's a brilliant film.
All right. And I was curious, is there any chance that you saw the Little Scene sequel?
No, I have not seen the sequel.
Okay. Because in 96, there's Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, Part 2, Mask of Sanity, which I can hardly find any information about. I'm going to guess it's not a masterpiece. But it would be interesting to see if it seems like it would be easy to completely betray the spirit of the original movie. But I guess I'll give it the benefit of the doubt since none of us have gotten our hands on it yet.
I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Generous of you, Mark. What a generous little guy.
Good. We'll have Katie back on to follow up on that.
Okay, I'll let y'all know.
All right.
All right. Well, then on that one, I think.
Well, then fast forward to 2019 for our next film, which I could see such a direct line of lineage going from Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer to The Golden Glove, which is interesting that in between them, we had that whole rush of Silence of the Lambs and Seven and Bone Collector and every like possible good or bad, clever serial killer movie in between, or even Zodiac. Yeah. And I wonder how much this was a conscious reaction then to that, and maybe even specifically the Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie that was so popular on Netflix, or just this idea of serial killer stands out there. But just as background I think maybe this is definitely a way lesser known movie. So just for anyone listening who doesn't know, this is based on a novel by Heinz Strunk, and it is about a real case of Fritz Hunke, who murdered 4 women between 1970 and 75 in Hamburg in the red light district. And this sticks a lot closer to the facts than Henry does. I'd say you probably get a pretty good idea of what the general gist of this real guy from this movie. But I did see, Katie, that you were the one who reviewed this for the AV Club.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So where was the...
Where'd you find
why did this seem like a particularly good one to pair with Henry? I see why, but I guess there's probably other possibilities out there too. I mean, how did this movie strike
there's
you?
One that just came out. If you enjoy this type of film, it's an elite club. Welcome. There's one that just came out called Megalomaniac. It just came out like last month, and that one it won I saw that one at the Fantasia Festival in Montreal last summer, and people kept saying, "I saw this horrible movie. It was so offensive. It was so violent. Oh my God! I wish I hadn't seen it." Blah blah blah. And I was like, "Oh, when's that playing?"
You're grounded. You're grounded. Oh
I'm sorry. It's just a thing.
Well, Seth, we just dodged having to watch that one.
Yeah.
Opted
Well,
for
that
this
one
instead.
That one is it's less viscerally disgusting than the Golden Glove. I think that's what I wanted to talk about with the Golden Glove, is just how disgusting that movie is. Like, Henry is brutal, but the Golden Glove is gross. Like,
it's smelly.
It's smelly. You can imagine, like, you can almost smell that movie, and I think it's good. It's good filmmaking in that way, for sure. But it has very similar aims to Henry in that it's sort of a deglamorizing exercise. And particularly, when you look at pictures of Jonas Dossler, who plays the main character, he looks absolutely nothing. Look up a picture of him right now, Jonas Dossler, who plays Fritz Honka.
Yes, audience. He is beautiful.
He is gorgeous.
He is in the tradition. I guess there is a rule if you're playing a serial killer anymore. You have to be Zac Efron or that guy who played Jeffrey Dahmer and My Friend Dahmer or whatever. It's the rule.
The difference here, though,
young hottie.
The difference is that you would never recognize him in this. That he looks, frankly, like subhuman in this movie. Like, he looks like a monster. And even worse than the real life guy.
If you look up the actual guy, he does have like very, very strange facial features. Yeah, like he is.
Yes, it's big, bulbous, rotting-looking nose and
all right, he's a little ugly.
Teeth,
yeah,
and I mean, honestly, the real guy doesn't even quite look as horrible as this from the one picture that I saw.
No, not really.
But compare that to Michael Rooker and Henry, where you're like, oh, this guy. He's got a little bit of charisma to it. Yeah, and Michael Rooker's like a good-looking guy. And I think actually Henry is a little bit more effective in that way because Honka is so disgusting in this movie. You don't have to sit and have that uncomfortable moment of like, rooting for or identifying with or even being attracted to him like you might be to Michael Rooker and Henry.
No, I don't even want him to walk by me. Yeah, just
right.
Like, you're just looking at him. You're just like, keep that guy away. Yeah.
Yeah, I would describe this as Henry minus Henry's any level of charisma, or even really significant or interesting relationships. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but really, this is kind of flattened out to take away all of that stuff. And like you said, the emphasis here is just on the repulsiveness of every inch of his apartment, and frankly almost anywhere that we visit in the movie is like that. The Golden Glove itself is the bar where he would get his victims from, and that was definitely a dive is a nice way to put it.
I think it's sub dive.
Like,
right. Where all the patrons like, oh man, yeah.
Yeah,
all the patrons may not be serial killers, but they are all like very strange, like clearly borderline antisocial or like or ostracized people.
Yeah, it's it's Germany in the 70s too. Like there's one guy who hangs out at the bar and they're like, "Oh yeah, he was SS." There's that really dark. There's a really dark underpinning to just that period of history.
Yeah, and I guess going back to the actually, I want to talk about the director who made this, Fatih Akin, who's a German filmmaker who is not somebody who makes horror movies until this, as far as I know. One of his films, In the Fade, actually won the Best Foreign Language Film Golden Globe.
That one deals with like extremism.
Okay, yeah, I haven't seen that one, but I did watch Head On before this, which is his film from 2004, which I really liked. That I can actually see. I'm glad that I watched it because I could see similarities here, where that's a movie that's another kind of well-trod story with two kind of, I don't know, degenerates is kind of a harsh way to put it, but people on the fringes of society who get into this what's essentially a green card marriage, and end up slowly starting to develop feelings for each other, which is a typical story, but he really makes the protagonist just unapologetically repellent and just brings this nervy energy and really dark humor to it. That I really enjoyed and I thought brought it to life. And that's not exactly what he does here, but I was at least, it did help me at least pick out where, oh, okay, here's where he's purposefully pushing this as so far into it being just unable to stomach how ugly and grotesque, especially this main character is, which at the best, like there's almost an absurdity to seeing him interact with other people because he just cannot not be a repugnant creep in any human encounter, which you could look as being I don't know, a strength or a weakness maybe of this movie, but the fact that he cast this unknown Jonas Dassler, who was 23 in 2019, playing a guy almost twice his age. And this isn't exactly like a Gary Oldman as Churchill performance, or even Charlize Theron in Monster. It's like, it doesn't seem like this actor had to play this role. Like, why go through all of the effort to get this heartthrob and drown him in this makeup and just have him drool and grunt for the whole movie if he's not going for, like, that's supposed to be the irony? Is this his direct reaction to casting heartthrobs and be like, hey, okay, I'm going to cast a hunk in this and then make him absolutely impossible to look at without vomiting? I don't know how we feel about this lead performance. Does it just do what is necessary, or is it too simple?
I don't think it's too simple. Well, like I said, I think that, Henry is a little bit better because, it challenges you in making having some charm to the main character. But I think that it's all of a piece. This film, I think, is making even less of a statement. I think the statement in this movie is that people are made out of meat, and sometimes meat is full of maggots, and that's the point of the movie. That's it. And it's just rolling around in the ground.
This guy's full of maggots.
That's great.
This guy's full of maggots.
That's
Everyone here is full of maggots, and it stinks like rotten meat, and it's just depravity. It's the lowest that humans can sink to.
But there's a slight green haze, and everything kind of looks like it's directed and shot by the guy who did Amelie. I feel like I kind of got that feeling. There's like a cute kind of twee moviness to this horrifying movie. Like almost maybe Wes Anderson too comes to mind. Just like it feels like an indie serial killer movie at a certain point. Mm-hmm. Am I crazy?
Well, it is much more polished visually. I mean,
yes.
Definitely.
I mean, it's repugnant and grotesque, absolutely. But there was it's weird to watch something that, it also has that kind of flip side to it. It feels like an arty kind of indie movie the way it's filmed, and has these
it's definitely artistically sort of done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is a talented filmmaker, and we have these little flights of fancy where he's imagining this girl working in a butcher shop that he is imagining that he wants to get into his life somehow. Like, we meet all the guys at the bar and learn their nicknames and these straight to camera shots. And
there's a lot of humor, actually. Like, even he has one of the big interactions he has is with this older woman that he sort of he beats her, but also there's like a relationship sort of for a second, like almost harmonious relationship of him having ownership over her, but her being okay with it, but also but it's so there's almost like this we're the odd couple kind of thing going on, even though you don't really have to keep reminding yourself it is just gross and depressing.
Worst Neil Simon play ever.
You kind of have to have those moments, though. You have to have moments that are kind of funny, and you have to have some moments, some shots that are cool to
Mhm.
look at, because otherwise the movie truly would be unwatchable.
Yeah, this comes close. Like I can't really
We're
overstate
not there yet.
how yeah, how gross the violence is in this, and they what am I trying to say here?
You guys are welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Boy,
So-
it's gross.
I'm
Yeah,
such a
it's
little,
very
I'm such
gross.
a little devil sometimes with this.
It's gross and it's icky and it's smelly.
I really do admire that, though. I admire, because you can't literally smell a film, but you can smell this movie. It's so gross.
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's sausages and food, and like you said, the maggots, which are literally oozing out of his floor into the
They're
neighbors
poor neighbors.
below.
Yeah.
That's
There's a
also
lit-
kind of
Oh.
a funny scene. I mean,
That is
Yeah.
it
pretty
starts
funny.
raining maggots down on them.
Yes.
Well, and a
Which
little
he
bit of
keeps on
commentary.
blaming the smell in his apartment on the neighbors downstairs for cooking stuff.
Oh, it's the Greeks. Yeah, he's always blaming the smell on the Greeks downstairs, which is kind
Yeah.
of a funny running joke.
That is pretty
Well,
funny.
I think it's kind of a commentary on racism, isn't it? That people
Sure.
are like, oh, those disgusting immigrants, but really it's the German guy
It's
upstairs
this evil-
who has
evil
a crawl space
German
full of
guy.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also it's more like it's still like realistic portrayal of a serial killer. So oftentimes male serial killer going forth and inflicting his wrath on women around him. It's more of that, which is also just painful in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
But they are also happening to these women that are in these like precarious, like they're already like in depressive, like hard
Yeah.
situations. So
Yeah.
it just makes it even worse on another level of like,
Yeah, this movie's really, it's sad in a different way than Henry, because like Becky doesn't see it coming, and that's what's sad about her story. But what's sad about these women's stories is that I think some of them, even if they knew they were going to die, they would go up there anyway, because they're just that deep into alcoholism. They're just like really, really deep addicts, and they kind of don't care if they live or die. And that's sad in a different way.
Yeah, almost everybody in this movie is a very desperate alcoholic, including the main character. And that's another thing, is it's not just this one guy who is such a depraved figure. It's like everybody has a certain level of ugliness or just depression. And
he starts to seem kind of normal at a certain point.
Right, like
amongst-
everyone is like this.
Yeah, it's like, does everybody have just like a bunch of bodies and like, oh yeah, killed another old lady last night.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is his victims are all the older women, some seemingly like possibly homeless, and in these desperate situations, and they don't have a terrible lot of personality that's on display in the movie. So everything does kind of feel of a piece. And I guess maybe that's the question, is there is a risk that it seems like the victims are sometimes presented in just the same unflattering light as the killer is. So I guess you could say at worst, this could risk kind of writing off everybody, as the whole situation just kind of below our consideration or being fascinated by. Which is interesting, because that's part of the goal here. I think this is taking the deglamorizing serial killers like to a whole other extreme than even Henry did. But that it's a little, I don't know, isn't that a little tricky then when you're talking about the victims as well, with them kind of getting lumped in there? Which I don't know. I mean, how do you see that? I think that there's instances where it pushes back against that, but I could see this movie being accused of.
I think it pushes back against that, and I think that showing, the really kind of depraved circumstances of it challenges you in the sense that it's like, okay, well, well, maybe this woman is, like she's homeless. She is a deep alcoholic. She passes out on the floor of the bar every night. But does she deserve to die? Because I think a lot of people tend to dehumanize, like, people who are in these really desperate circumstances. And this movie challenges you by saying, like, okay, but do they deserve to die, though? And especially in these horrific ways?
Sure, and the way that it draws out their murders in these just horrific ways, especially the woman who is strangled to death, that just goes on forever
Oh
and
my God,
ever.
that scene is really, really, really tough.
I'll
Right.
be real. I scrubbed a bit. I couldn't really handle some of these. I was come out.
It's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
you're
mean,
allowed to cower away from the screen on this podcast
I
if you
saw
have
this
to.
movie in a theater.
Oh my God.
So you can't look away
you
in
can't
a theater.
scrub.
No,
you can't scrub
can't.
there. You can't scrub it away no matter what
And
you do. But
the funny part too is that it was at an Alamo Draft House. You know, they like serve food at Alamo Draft Houses, and
Oh right.
I had the foresight to not order anything to eat during this movie, but some poor people, they ordered
Oh my
food
God.
and then they had to sit and watch the Gold Globe.
and then throw it up.
Someone
there
pour
sitting-
themselves.
A
Eating
lot
a
of untouched
sausage.
plates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, I do think about that a little bit. If there is, I mean, I almost felt like, is there some sort of part of, like, it's like a indictment of Germany in that time period? Like, is that because? Yeah, I do feel like there is this like not equal opportunity, that like everybody is as repugnant, obviously, as the main character here. Like, he is a horrible, like, fucked up monster, but like it does seem like we are getting this panorama of everyone involved is just fucked up and messed up and dirty and like in a terrible place.
Yeah.
So I
And
don't. It felt like it was kind of touching on that. I don't know how deep it goes really about like history there or the time and place or what.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think that, you know, the sort of condemnation of like Germany not wanting to look at the most horrible things that are going on in Germany is obviously a very loaded thing, which can't help but point towards, you know, Nazism in the Nazi era and all the quote unquote good Germans who chose to look away while the Holocaust was happening. I think that that's implied in this film. It doesn't underline it really, but I think it is implied.
Yeah, we just get the briefest mentions, like you said, about someone being in the SS, or that, oh yeah, I had a dad who was in the concentration camps. Yeah, because he says that his dad was a communist who was in the camps. But then it doesn't really run with that, which part of me appreciated that it wasn't trying to underline that too much.
Sure,
And
it would
also
have
just-
been a little distasteful to underline it too much, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also so much of this movie seems like the point is not to make a point that's that big. And so almost like it's giving us a little, like it's mentioning these things that are potentially loaded and then intentionally not using that as an excuse to make this more highfalutin than it needs to be. That it really is just here to rub our face in the banality of everything. In a way similar Henry does, but like I definitely think taken to a bigger extreme.
Yeah, like I said before, I think
Mhm.
they have similar aims, but they're producing two different visceral reactions. One is shock, and the other one's disgust.
In a way, this whole movie to me feels like something that really depends on the context of which it's existing in. That if you weren't living in a world that's full of serial killer movies that put up these specific expectations, that otherwise you might wonder, what is the point of making us sit through all of this?
I might.
At least that's where I was coming from, that it's like, well, this actually works a lot better knowing that it's a young hot guy behind the makeup and knowing that I'm normally going to expect him to go after the pretty young white girl. And I don't know, maybe it would have worked better if he actually had gotten somebody more famous to do this stunt, like Zac Efron or somebody that
Franz Rogowski.
exactly. So
the
who
first
else?
German actor I can think of.
Yeah, or that what's Alden Ehrenreich or the
Alden Ehrenreich's American. It's
Right.
just a German name.
Oh, okay. Well, that shows what I.
Yeah, he's
Okay.
American.
Melting pot.
And either way, he's hot enough to do it. And
He's
so
hot
maybe
enough
that
to
would
make ugly.
Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe that it's weird to not know and not discover until afterwards who's actually behind that makeup because it's not. He had this actor. I don't know. He hasn't really done much before this, and I don't think he's done a movie since. It's not necessarily a powerhouse performance. It's like the point is for it to not give you anything. So
Yeah. There's also the
I don't
element
know.
for me, and I don't know if I'm just mistaken or just was like sleeping, but there's no based on a true story moment either. Is there?
Well, over the end credits, we do get real life pictures of the killer, the victims, the apartment that he was living in with all of the, pictures of naked women posted up around everywhere.
Oh, I had already shut my laptop to go cry.
As soon as it went to black.
I was like, okay,
Done. I can go now.
check.
He just ran right outside.
I did a good job. I watched the movie for the podcast.
But there is no text. There's nothing saying he's served this many years in jail and died in
Mhm.
98 kind of thing.
Okay.
But that also did make me wonder, like, why did he put these real pictures over the credits? Because that seems like a typical true crime thing to do at the end of a movie. I don't know.
feel like it's essential because I feel like I would have struggled less with this movie had I known that it was based on a true story. Because throughout it, I was just constantly being like, who dreamed this up? Why is this the story that you had to tell? Like, it came out of your little imagination. This is what you want to use it for. And, like, I mean, yeah, it's like a real murderer. Okay. Like, that warrants a little bit more. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you can look at this movie, like you were saying, Mark, outside of the
Mhm.
context of the type of film. Like, this movie wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Henry. This is very much a descendant of Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the end, I mean, this doesn't seem like it was a very well received film, but it also
No.
seems that maybe that was the point to it, that maybe this is first and foremost a provocation of a kind, an experiment, not unlike movies we've talked about by Lars von Trier or Michael Haneke, where you would just
Yeah,
say,
dude, I was going to bring up Lars von Trier. I was like, nobody loves fucking with the audience. Have you done The House That Jack Built on this podcast yet?
No,
No.
not yet.
we've
Oh,
done.
you're going to hate it.
I have seen it, and I know that that'll be a rough one. Seth hasn't, so he's gonna hate it.
Boy, I
But
love
we've
that
already
guy.
we've done two
Hey,
of his
man,
movies.
you signed on
and-
for this podcast, buddy.
Yeah.
So everybody says.
Oh, that's part of the fun.
It doesn't mean I have to like them. It's just how it is. I'm just along.
Yeah, Von Trier, like we've already talked about Antichrist and Dogville, and he still has at least 3 or more movies that we could still talk about. This whole podcast could just be about him. And
Yeah, totally.
And it wouldn't be fun if I just liked all the stuff that Marc made me watch, I guess.
oh yeah, no, we need to. There has to be a masochistic, sadistic element to this podcast. That's the fun of it.
There must be a victim.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'll say is my closing thoughts for this, and then we'll see if Seth would unwatch this movie, because I feel like there's a chance for this
You
one.
don't know that.
I said there's a chance. I'm curious. But I could definitely see how, this is a longer movie than Henry. It's a grosser movie. There's a little less going on performance-wise and relationships-wise. Almost, it does almost make it like a stunt, it feels like to me, or one that would be baffling if you didn't realize it was a stunt. And since the lack of insight is the point, at worst, I could see how that would get repetitive or maybe even reductive as far as its view of all the characters and what's going on. But there is a strange integrity to it for it doing what it does. So I wouldn't unwatch it. I could see maybe there's a limit to how much this doesn't exactly transcend, I guess, what it's trying to do to become a better movie to me. But it gives you a lot of food for thought, not to bring up food again in this context.
I just vomited over myself.
But again, we'll let Katie give us the final word again. So Seth, I want to see how much did this movie traumatize you?
I just threw up again thinking about it, and I think it's an easy unwatch for me. I think I had a not fun time. It was one of those where I said, which is no, I mean I'm being silly. I don't know. I think maybe if I had gone into it and read the wiki page first, I would have known that it was a true story. Or if I hadn't closed my laptop so quickly, I might have had more of like. But I don't know. Just I think just the feeling of it being kind of this rather pointless. I don't know. Yeah, exercise that was being thrown at me as a viewer, like a challenge. Like sometimes I don't respond all that well to just pure like, boy, let's see if you can get through this one, audience. I know you guys love fun and all that, and like punishing the audience. I don't know. It only goes so far for me. Sometimes I am just like, all right, you don't want me to watch it? I won't watch it, I guess. So I guess I would say I would unwatch it, although it is clearly made by a filmmaker who is worth their salt. It's kind of beautiful to look at when it's not horrible to look at, which is most of the time. But that's where I'm at.
All right, we got a new.
Yay!
You did
All
it.
right.
It's been a while.
I
don't remember the last one I would unwatch.
Yeah. For sure. And so, Katie, I know your original review, you gave this a B-, and I wonder then,
one
was
of the
there
higher grades that movie got?
Right on Rotten Tomatoes? It's one of the few ones
Yeah.
in that range. But do you still feel generally the same way? Was there anything new or different about your reaction this time?
No. The only difference was that watching it in such close proximity to Henry made me think a little less of it. But Henry's like an A movie to me. Henry is like a 5-star movie, and so I wouldn't change my grade. It just, the weaknesses of it are more obvious when you watch it back to back.
That may have affected me too. That seems kind of actually, yeah, which does happen on this podcast, or double featuring these like-minded things.
Mm-hmm. But I think on the whole, I think that, I've stated several times that they have similar aims. And I think this one is there. It's very nihilistic. There's no there. And that's kind of the point. And it ties into this whole deglamorizing serial killers thing. This one is grasping at a little more social commentary, in terms of, talking about like racism and the perfect victim and these types of ideas, but it doesn't develop them quite as much. It's mostly trying to get you to have like a really visceral, repellent experience. And I will say a thing about being a film critic is you watch a lot of movies, and after a while 90% of them start to blur together. And so I think that like critics and film programmers who also watch a lot of movies, we tend to gravitate towards anything that produces a response, because like your neurons kind of get fried, and you need a little bit of, to use a drug metaphor, you need something a little bit stronger to like feel the same jolt. And so I think for me, that's what impressed me about it. I was like, wow, I haven't been this repelled by a movie in a long time. B-. So no, I would not unwatch it. It's
All
just
right.
the hard stuff.
Right, exactly. All right, well then, yeah, and if this doesn't sound like your speed, listeners, check out Megalomaniac. Maybe that'll get you.
Henry, damn it. My cat Henry, portrait of a serial kitty.
Yeah.
Ruining my just walk all over my keyboard.
So do you like Megalomaniac? How would you compare that to Golden Glove?
Megalomaniac is even tougher because it's a lot of sexual assault in that movie. So it's I mean, it's maybe good that we didn't watch that one, because that one has all the disgust of the Golden Glove and the like really brutal, kind of like I was saying before, you don't even want to call it sex. It's just power,
Right.
like really brutal misogyny. It's got both of those things. So yeah, I guess if you watch these and say, what if all the worst parts of these were put together? That's megalomania.
All right, sounds like a future episode. I can't wait to make Seth watch this movie.
Well, give him ideas, filling his head with trash.
Oh boy. Well, Katie, thank you so much for brightening our day with these wonderful movies and for your time. And
Happy Halloween!
happy Halloween.
Woo!
Yeah, these are our official unwatchable recommendations for your Halloween party tonight.
With your mom.
Yeah.
If you hate your friends, yeah.
Exactly.
If your friends are all hardened genre fans like you are, you know, if you're really, really deep into horror movies, then yeah, I'd say then The Golden Glove might be for you. I think Henry's for everybody. I think Henry has a lot to say. It's a really upsetting watch, but I think it is a brilliant, brilliant movie.
I think
sure.
both of these kind of reminded me of my feelings about Freddy Got Fingered, in that it's like going to the like, oh, we're gonna be random comedy guys, like, hey, Adam Sandler, I can be like random and stuff, and then like he just like shits on the floor or whatever, and like everybody runs out of the room, and like these are the same way where it's like, oh, you guys like blood and stabbing now? That's cool, let's do it. And then they go
Check
in the
this
room.
out.
Everybody runs away. The Halloween party's ruined.
Yeah.
And they're
These
just like left
movies.
being
Yeah.
like, I thought you guys liked this. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what's provocative about
Exactly.
these movies, is that
Mhm.
people do like to watch murders in movies and, you know, like read about true crime.
But in a
and
certain way.
read
That's
about-
what it exposes,
Exactly.
right? It exposes that
Mhm.
we like these things, but only in a certain way. And it's fun to say that you're like, oh, I love murder and guts and blood or something. But like, it's another thing to actually.
But the reality is this. The
Yeah.
reality is just
Mhm.
like depressing and gross.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, sometimes if you like to smoke, you sit there and dad makes you smoke 3 packs in a row, and then you can never pick one up again. But that's the analogy.
Good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
that we'll
good
end
one.
on here. But Katie, is there any? Well, my first question is, now that it is Halloween, are there any new horror movies that you are excited about that you want to recommend to people? Yeah, let's start with that.
Oh, dude, new.
Or has it not been a good?
I just don't know what's
crop?
coming out at the end of the month.
Oh, that's a good point. Well, even if it's something that is not going to be out for a little bit, I don't know. I just read your review of the new Pet Sematary movie, which doesn't sound too promising either.
That
So
movie was shit.
yeah. So it makes me wonder: is there anything to get excited about, even if it's in the future?
I have one. Well, on the dark and evil tip, When Evil Lurks is new on Shudder, and that's an Unwatchables pick for sure. And then there's another movie that I saw at Fantastic Fest called Stop Motion that was a really cool movie. It's about a stop motion animator, and Aislinn Clark from The Nightingale, another one I would recommend for the Unwatchables. She stars in it, and the director's a stop motion animator himself, and so he did all the animation in the movie, and it's sort of like a descent into madness kind of thing, but the way he does it is really visceral and gory. It's body horror. It combines stop motion animation and body horror, and I thought it was a very interesting film. Stop motion.
That sounds sick.
Yeah.
All right. So if you need any palate cleansers after these ones, then except maybe When Evil
not
Lurks,
those,
maybe not that. Okay. Hey, that's where horror is right now, I guess. Sometimes the best stuff is the most extreme. Like I said, we got to get that harder hit now. But anything else you wanna plug or draw anyone's attention to?
You can find me on Twitter. I have a column at Letterboxd. I do a column on physical media releases every month at Letterboxd called Shelf Life. And you'll find me around the festival circuit. I've been doing a good amount of festival work these days.
Hey.
All right.
If you see me at Sundance, say hello.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again. And, maybe someday we can hang out at the Golden Glove, get a couple drinks.
will fit right in.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.